Hey gang, welcome back to Forehead Corner. I'm your host Martha Kelly, and this episode is going to cover the remaining part of the docuseries called The Way Down, God, Greed, and the Cult of Gwen Shamblin. Something to that effect. It's on HBO Max. And just to be fully transparent, I absolutely hated watching this, and I have hated talking about it. The docuseries is 5 episodes. It is very well made. I have nothing but respect and positive feelings towards the documentarians. Absolutely hate the subject matter. Never ever gonna cover another conservative Christian church or cult ever. Because guess what? They all abuse kids. I thought this was going to be a fun, wacky weight loss cult documentary. Didn't turn out that way. Before I get to that, if you want to subscribe to the Patreon, gosh, that would be great. No pressure. But it is patreon.com/foreheadcornerpod. There are 2 tiers. Oh, 2 tiers, $5, which gets you the bonus episode every week that's only available on Patreon. And then this part's wild, the $10 tier. For that, you get the bonus episode and access to the episodes in the vault. And the peculiar thing about the vault episodes is that they're in the vault because they were not good enough for the main episode or the Patreon bonus episodes. I did a terrible job on these episodes and I shoved them in a vault. It's an actual physical vault. It's in, it's underground somewhere in Burbank. I can't disclose it because everyone will go there. But they're terrible and you have to pay extra to be able to listen to them. And it doesn't make any sense. And we all love it. We love things that don't make sense. Also, would love it if you wanted to email the pod at foreheadcornerpod@gmail.com. And as always, I'm happy to be recording here at Sides and Sounds Studio in Burbank, California. It's hot as shit outside. Luckily, this studio has great AC. And I am recording with Jason Crow, as always, who is the only reason I haven't already quit the podcast. He is the sound engineer and producer, and he also works with creative people doing self-tape auditions and recording whatever you want. Come in, record yourself playing a game of Monopoly by yourself. It's not against the law. Here, I've done everything I can to avoid talking about this fuck-ass documentary. And here we go. Picking up where we left off. So where we left off, for people who haven't heard it, I recommend you go and listen to last week's main episode. My intention was to cover the whole docuseries in one episode. But there's too much in it. So I only got through the first episode and part of the second. Picking up where we left off, which is Gwen Shamblin. She's the head of the cult. She's the lady with the giant head of hair. It goes like up this high. I'm not exaggerating. By the way, if you're looking at me and you're saying, Martha, are you on your way to being bald? Yes. Thank you, Zetbound, for snatching me bald with there's a whole Reddit about people losing hair on Zetbound, which is a GLP-1 that I'm on. I had super thick hair to start, so I'm not bald yet, but this GLP-1 is doing everything it can. Plus my roots are coming in. I think I get them colored before we record the next week's main episode, so enjoy them while you can. But they do make me look even balder. And all I can say about that is you're welcome. Okay, we pick up where we left off. The second episode, I think, is when we found out that Gwen had a first husband. My belief in episode 1 was that she was a huckster, if that's the word, a religious huckster, a religious scammer who had just never gotten married. And then once she became super wealthy from making money off this church, then this younger guy, this younger, fadingly handsome guy, was like, this is my ticket to a luxury life. And he, kind of romanced her and they got married. And I was like, yeah, I guess I can understand why. Sometimes I think it happens more with men because it's more socially acceptable for men. But sometimes non-young people with a lot of money will marry people much younger and hotter. And those younger, hotter people marry them essentially for their money. I wouldn't want to do that. Luckily, I'm not wealthy, so there's really no chance for me to do that. But I think I would feel really bad if I thought someone was only with me for my money. And who gives a shit? Why am I talking about me? This is about Gwen. So her first husband's name is David. They were married for 40 years. No, really? That can't be right, and it's not in my notes. That can't be right. Because when they get a divorce, her kids are only in their 20s to early 30s. And they couldn't have been married 10 years or more before they had kids because they're super religious. I don't know. I guess watch the documentary or just Google it. Anyway, they were married for at least 30 years. And they started the Remnant Fellowship Church together. And then David became just disenchanted because he felt like Gwen was using it to make money. And also, he was not thin. That was a really big deal to her. The whole point of the church was like, if you're obeying God, which is their emphasis on Christianity, is obedience to God's authority as handed down by Gwen. And if you're obeying God, then you're definitely not overweight. And he, by her measure, was overweight. So she doesn't really want him being a public-facing part of the church anymore. And then she wants to divorce him. And he begs her not to, doesn't want to get a divorce, offers her more money of their shared assets to not divorce him. And she's like, honestly, I would rather lose a fair amount of money and assets in order to divorce you and marry a hot young guy. And I'm saying hot compared to her first husband. So they get a divorce, and she marries Joe Lara, who I spoke about in the other episode. And he's this younger former actor, wants to be a country music star. The Remnant Fellowship Church has a recording studio, so they try to make that happen. It doesn't work. And Joe's ex that he has a child with, her name's Natasha. She's in episode 1, and I've talked about her a bit. And they have a kid together. And from the time that he marries Gwen, they are trying to get full custody of Joe and Natasha's daughter. And Natasha doesn't want it. But this church had a full legal team because they have so much money. It's like Scientology or the Mormon Church or the Catholic Church, probably the originators of that, of just having a huge amount of wealth and very high paid lawyers. Speaking of which, side note, I watched the movie The Verdict with Paul Newman for a promotional thing having to do with Coyote versus Acme. And that movie addresses how much money the Catholic Church has and how they use it. They use their lawyers to prevent justice. We'll just say that. But watch the movie The Verdict, because it's Paul Newman, and he's not even young in it. I feel like I already talked about this. He's blindingly handsome. If you want to go blind, watch The Verdict. Okay, so they after they talk about the divorce with David and the marriage to Joe, they have a former member saying, I can't believe that Gwen didn't lose a huge number of this congregation when she divorced David and married Joe, because she had always forbidden women in the church from divorcing their husbands, no matter what was going on in the marriage. Even if there was abuse or infidelity on the part of the husband, you weren't allowed to get a divorce. You were told to submit to your husband. And the main reason for that, we find out, is that Gwen wants to keep the congregation big. So she doesn't want people getting divorced and some of the family leaving the church. And so when she gets a divorce, a bunch of other women in the church are like, okay, well, if you can do it, I can do it. And they get divorces. And then Gwen systematically uses the church's legal team to go for full custody of the children of these women who are divorcing their husbands for things like infidelity and abuse. And the whole reason is she just wants to keep the kids in the church to keep the numbers up for the congregation. And side note, episode 3, which I'm barely going to talk about, is a huge part of it is about the child abuse within this church and community, the child abuse that Gwen directed people to commit against their children. And it is even more chilling to know that when moms would try and leave and get their kids out, she would use her wealth and power to try and prevent getting kids out of a community that was physically and emotionally very abusive. And that is, why I hated watching this documentary. Then we get to the shambling kids, Michael and Elizabeth. They are David and Gwen's kids. And when we start hearing about them in this documentary, they're young adults. They are her successors at that time. Not at that time. When they were in their early 20s, they were both totally on board with the church. And Michael has since left the church and speaks out about it. Elizabeth has taken over as taken her mom's place. But when we first start hearing about them, they're young and they're both in it. And they both get married young, and they're both thin and good looking, which of course is at Gwen's insistence. The daughter goes on to clearly appears to have an eating disorder, is concerningly thin. Michael, the son, goes up and down in his weight. And, excuse me, by the way, I had the most disgusting lunch. I'm still nauseous from it, and it was 2.5 hours ago. No, it was almost 3 hours ago. A quick side note, I've had this lunch before, kind of, but I had a peanut butter protein bar, the perfect brand that's refrigerated, a chocolate chip cookie from Starbucks, and a grande mocha cookie crumble frappuccino. I normally was getting a tall, not a grande. It didn't occur to me until after I ate this and started to feel nauseous. The grande frappuccino, the chocolate mocha, whatever, cookie crumble, it is essentially a milkshake. So I had a milkshake for lunch with a chocolate chip cookie and then a glob of peanut butter, which those protein bars, it's just like that big of a, why am I like that glob of peanut butter? It's delicious, but it's, the last time that I had a milkshake as a meal was like 30 plus years ago in Austin before I quit drinking. And I swore I'd never do it again. And now look at me. Anyway, Okay, I'm looking at my notes about the kids. So Elizabeth is the daughter. Her husband is one of the people killed in the plane crash. So if you haven't, you should listen. You know what? Should you watch the docuseries if you want to understand everything, or listen to last week's episode if you haven't already and understand a little more what I'm talking about. Or neither. Live your life, but it's the whole series starts with a plane crash, and it's 7 leaders of the Remnant Fellowship Church, and we find out later it's Gwen, Joe, he's flying the plane, and we also find out they were flying in very cloudy, foggy conditions, and in those conditions, you fly by instruments only because you can't see, and it's easy to get disoriented. And Joe was flying the plane, and he was not certified as an instruments only pilot, and he did it anyway, and then they crashed and they all died. And Elizabeth's husband was one of the people on the plane. So it was Gwen, Joe, Elizabeth's husband, and then 4 other church leaders, one of whom I can't remember his name, but he is someone who is in episode 3. And you find out that he beat his 2.5-year-old daughter all day, one day, and referred to it as like helping her spiritually grow or something. It's just, I'm sorry I even said that. It's so triggering, and I wish there was a different word than trigger, but I mean, maybe I'm gonna go back to school and get my English degree, and maybe then I'll learn some new words. I don't know. But essentially, it starts out Michael and Elizabeth both gung-ho for the church, partly because they are in line to inherit a huge amount of wealth from their mom because of the church. But they also have this status in the church. Get married young. Elizabeth keeps going. Michael leaves the church for a while when he's young, wants to become a country music star, doesn't get a record deal, doesn't succeed at that, comes back to the church and is described as being different when he came back and very angry. But he comes back. He's depressed. He has a drinking problem and his weight goes up and down. And when his weight is up, Gwen doesn't want him in the public-facing role in the church. And then rumors start that he is also quite promiscuous and cheating on his wife and soliciting these affairs from the church congregation. So, sorry. Oh, before that, there's a video before we hear all that, there's a video of Michael when he's like college age, and he's doing a youth outreach promotional video to try and get kids to join the church. And it's bizarre when you think about it, or when I thought about it, because when you're in your early 20s, when you're college age, that is when a lot of people go out on their own into the world, and developmentally, it's when you start to find out what it's like to make big decisions and what happens when you make a big decision and it doesn't go the way you hoped it would. I want to say something encouraging for people who are at that age. The spoiler alert, it's not the end of the world if you're college age or in your early 20s or even older and you make a big decision and you turn out to be like, that didn't turn out how I wanted. I wish I had chosen a different thing. That's what life is. It's not the end of the world. It's important to learn about life and yourself and the world by making decisions and trying things. It's also really important to experience life without your parents controlling everything you do. This is my opinion. I don't know if psychologists or anyone else would say this, but I think it's really important to get out there and just be a fucking idiot. Get drunk, smoke marijuana, smoke cigarettes if you want to when you're young. That's the only time it's okay to do it. You have to quit. When you leave college, you have to quit or you're going to get emphysema. act a fool. I mean, get in trouble. We got in trouble one time in the dorms because a bunch of us were staying up late, ostensibly to study, to do an all-nighter studying or writing a paper. And then a thunderstorm came through, but it was warm out, so we all went outside, and there was this big field. Davis, where I went to school, is a big kind of a flat area. And we're at this field outside, this big field right outside our dorm. And we're watching in the distance all these huge flashes of lightning. And because we were kids and we were loopy and it was the middle of the night, all of us started cheering every time there was a lightning strike and laughing hysterically and cheering and clapping and being obnoxious. And the RA got really mad about it. His name was Eric. I loved him to death and I still do. Understandably. He was pre-med and he had finals coming up. This was the end of the year. And he was like, you guys are fucking screaming outside at like 2 a.m. for an hour. That is not cool. And he was totally right. And I felt bad. However, that's one of my fondest memories of being at college was there was also, not to go on too much of a tangent, I also saw a TikTok last week of these 4 young women, probably for sure in their 20s, maybe college age. And they're all dressed up and made up and their hair's done. And they're walking along a dock somewhere. And there's this song that I think is an AI song on TikTok called Melissa, I'm Drunken Outside. Just go on TikTok and search it and you'll hear it. That music is playing and one of these girls just hands her purse to one of the other girls and runs to the edge of the dock and dives into the water for no reason. Messes up her hair, her makeup. She's in an expensive dress. Her friends are like, what are you doing? And like, that's what you're supposed to do when you're young, is you're supposed to enjoy your ability to bounce back and your physical resilience and strength and freedom. And I just think it's really important to find out what it's like to be your own boss in that sense. And here comes this church having the leader's son, who's not even, you wouldn't know from the video, but he's not even wholeheartedly into this church, making a video telling other young people, don't you want to be different? Don't you want to be different from all the other kids your age? Like, they're all out partying and having sex and doing drugs, and don't you want to be different? And it's like the sales pitches don't you think it would feel better to join a high control religion where the emphasis is on obedience to the authority of the church, in parentheses, his mom, like, and also be skinny? And another side note about Michael, because it's clear that his dad's genetics are not naturally thin, and Michael goes up and down and struggles with his weight. And so when he is thin, when you see video and pictures of him thin, I know because of my own biology, my own body chemistry and genetics, if you're not naturally thin, in order to be what the society considers actually skinny and thin, you have to be on a really restrictive diet, and you're hungry all the time and it fucking sucks. You don't have to starve yourself to not be overweight, but everyone's body is different and there's a range of what's considered normal. And if you want to be considered thin, you want to be on the low end of normal, if not below that, like people with eating disorders. And you're hungry all the time. Who am I? Anyway, he's promoting this really restrictive, authoritarian cult to young people and trying to sell it as like, doesn't this sound fun and different? Don't you want to be different? And it's sad. And And then we find out that Elizabeth, Gwen's daughter, who's still in the church, has remarried a guy from, because her first husband died in the plane crash. We find out that her 5-month-old baby passed away. And they never talk about it in the church because it's a prosperity gospel in a way, Gwen's church. And so what she teaches people is if you're being obedient to God's authority, God will bless you with good fortune, with wealth, good health, obedient children, happy family, whatever. Thinness is really, of course, is obviously the top one for her. And this inexplicable, tragic loss of this 5-month-old baby, there's no way for them to talk about it. Because if you talk about random, chaotic tragedies that happen, which everyone is susceptible to, there's no way to predict or prevent some tragedies. They don't, that's just how life is. But in these high control religions, it's similar in AA. If you talk about that, then that undermines the message that if you do this list of things that we're claiming work, if you do them, God will protect you. And if something bad happens to you, then it must be because you're not doing these things that you're supposed to be doing. And she's the church leader's daughter, and they can't say, well, she's not doing something right. So they just don't talk about it. And she's not allowed to publicly grieve. And they show pictures and videos of her during that time. And she's like Karen Carpenter, gaunt, hollowed out eyes, very, very underweight, and just going on as if nothing had happened. It's like not talking about it. And it's really sad. Okay, coming to, God damn it, I hate that. I'm sorry. Okay, now we're hearing from a young woman about how she had an affair with Michael. So this is when we find out, I already mentioned, he had a drinking problem and he was having affairs with lots of women in the church. And some of them might not have been affairs. Some of them might have been somewhat coerced because he's in a position of power because he's the leader's son. And he would just hit on women in the church. And, that is a power imbalance. They don't really talk about that. And maybe that didn't happen. Maybe it was all consensual. Maybe he was, appealing to some women. But this particular woman is saying she wanted a divorce. Her husband was, I just gurgled, apologies. Her husband was abusive or unfaithful or both. I can't remember. But in any case, it was a terrible marriage. She wanted out. And the threat to her if she left her husband was the church will use its lawyers to sue for custody, so you're going to lose your kids. So she stayed in the marriage, but she came up with a plan, which was when she noticed Michael flirting with and acting lasciviously, if that's how you pronounce it, towards women in the church and giving her the eye at one point, she was like, aha, I'm going to have an affair with him, and I'm going to get text messages and other kinds of proof. And then I'm going to say, tell your mom not to come after my kids if I leave my husband, or I'm going to expose the affair. And that's what she did. And she does say she feels bad because she said, I knew he was vulnerable. He was drinking a lot. He was depressed. He was being kind of rejected by his mom because of his weight gain and not being this picture of success that you're supposed to be in that church. And she said she knew that she kind of took advantage of his vulnerability in a way, but that the harm that that church does to people way outweighs it, and she needed to do what she needed to do to get herself and her kids away from that church, and it worked. And I'm not saying I don't have sympathy for Michael on some level, but I also feel like you shouldn't have to blackmail anybody to leave a relationship you don't want to be in. You shouldn't be threatened with the loss of your kids. Okay. So there's that part about her. And then at the end of this episode, which is episode 2, we hear from a former member that the things that Gwen cares about the most from her congregation is that they are not overweight and that they have obedient kids. And those are the things that she emphasizes as signs that they are being faithful and obedient to God's authority. If you're thin and if your kids are obedient, you're in good standing in the church. If not, you gotta either get out or get with the program. So, episode 3 begins with a news clip of about a news clip saying 2 former members of this church were charged with beating their 8-year-old son to death. Now, they were convicted, and they both got 30 years, they both got life sentences plus 30 years. I'm not going to talk about much about the child abuse stuff because it's so horrifying. I will just tell you, and I'm sorry to tell you this, fast forward about a minute, maybe 2, just to be safe, if you don't want to hear anything about it. The EMTs who went to the house the night that it happened said it was the worst case of child abuse they've ever seen. This couple who did this to their son, they had a baby who had died of SIDS, supposedly 11 weeks before they killed their 8-year-old. And this family was receiving parenting guidance directly from Gwen, and her guidance to them and to all of the parents in this church was very much like James Dobson's, and you can Google him to see what I'm talking about, or like the IBLP, Bill Gothard. It is use physical punishment, harsh physical punishment, to get your children to obey you without question immediately, and hit them with any number of different objects. And this was Gwen's counsel to this couple. So, and in the news story, they're saying the church is being looked into because we are hearing that this church leader tells people to beat their kids, and these people were getting advice from her and they beat their kid to death. And it's awful. Okay. And this episode is why I'm never going to watch another documentary about any religious group or any cult ever, because they all eventually, cults and extreme religious communities, when you drill down far enough, you always get to child abuse and or sex abuse. It's always, and money. Those are the 3. And I love money, but the sex abuse and the child abuse, no. I thought that this was just going to be about weight loss, and instead it's awful. So I'm not going to talk any more about the child abuse. If you want to hear more about that case, it's very upsetting. You can watch episode 3 of this docuseries. But then at some point they pivot to talking about, I looked at it and then it went right out of my head. Oh, then they pivot to how the church dealt with mental health. And there's a woman, they basically didn't believe in depression, told people not to take antidepressants. This was another thing like grief where you're going to make the church look bad. We're saying if you do what God wants you to do, he will take care of you. So how could it be that you're doing what you're supposed to do and you have depression? God wouldn't allow that, because I'm telling you, if you do what you're supposed to do, God's going to bless you with everything you want, or a great life, or whatever. But so they didn't believe in clinical depression. This woman, a former member, tells her story of postpartum depression, getting to a point where she was suicidal, checking herself into a mental health hospital because she was afraid she was going to kill herself, and she felt crazy. And once she got in there, was like, this is worse than being at home. And quick side note, and trigger warning, talking about suicide and depression. I've had several times in my life, starting from adolescence. That's when my clinical depression started. I've had several times throughout my life. It hasn't happened in years, but I've had several times where I was severely clinically depressed and wanted to kill myself, and talked to my therapist about it. And there were times where a handful of times where she asked me, would you feel safer in a hospital? Do you want, is that something? And I always was like, no, because I had a friend in high school whose mom had schizophrenia and was in a mental hospital. And one day after school, I went with this friend to visit her mom for emotional support. And it was such a disturbing environment, of course, because we don't take great care of people in mental hospitals. There's not a lot of money for it. And there's not a lot of the ratio of nurse to patients is not enough, just like regular hospitals now. And it was just a really depressing, upsetting place. And I was like, no, if I go in there, I will kill myself. So I know what this woman's talking about when she's saying it was hell to be in this mental hospital, and they wouldn't let her out. And so she called her husband, and he talked to the church, and they told him to tell her that she was evil for doing this, for going to seek help outside the church for her depression, that she was evil, that she deserved to be in hell, and that he was not going to come get her. And then after a while, the psychiatrist is able to get him to come to the hospital. And she said it took like almost an hour of this doctor to be able to convince him, your wife has an illness and she needs medication. And so finally, and that she wasn't just being, like they called it, like she was just being selfish and sinful. And the doctor had to explain to him for almost an hour, like, no, this is an illness. She needs medication. So her husband finally said, okay, you can take antidepressants, but you can't talk about it, and you can't ever take them in front of me, so that I can honestly say I don't know if anyone from the church asks me if you're back on antidepressants. Like, that's how anti-psychiatric help this church was. Okay. Oh, and then the episode ends with the plane crash. And I already talked about who was on it and why it crashed, which was Joe not being certified to fly under the conditions they were under. Episode 4 starts out talking about the plane crash. It happened in 2021, and we find out they were on their way to a MAGA Stop the Steal rally, which, if you remember, in 2021, at the end of 2020 and well into 2021, there were all, Trump and Roger Stone, the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, a bunch of wackadoos were having these rallies and like telethons of like, and conferences of like, this election was stolen from Donald Trump and we're going to prove it. And so they were on their way to one of those. And go ahead and ask yourself if I feel bad for them. And let me know what you think. And then also we find out like the first 3, this episode 4, you can tell is made well after episode 3 ended. Because episode 3 ended with the plane crash, and the people making the documentary, of course, they didn't know there was, I mean, they started making the docuseries before the plane crash when everyone was still alive. So they didn't know that was going to happen. And then release the first 3 episodes, and then people wanted more. So they made 2 more episodes, but they made them months or a year later. So we find out that the church, after the first 3 episodes came out, the Remnant Fellowship Church released a statement denying all the claims made in the first 3 episodes about them. Excuse me. And then they start talking about the wedding. And this is where I have to go to my other notes, and I'm sorry. Because that's as far as I got condensing my notes. There's gonna be a lot of looking at my phone. I apologize. But they talk about the plane crash, who was on it, why it happened. Well, I've already discussed that. Then they get to the fact that there had been a wedding planned, a church member wedding planned the day of the plane crash, later that afternoon, and that they went through with it. And at the wedding, nobody acknowledged the plane crash, and everyone acted happy and like they were having the time of their lives. And the people getting married, the bride is the daughter. If you remember from episode 1, there's this couple that has a daughter who got sucked into the cult by a boy she met in high school. She and that boy are getting married. So the parents now in episode 4 are talking about, we weren't going to go, and then we did go. And we were shocked at how everybody was acting like everything was normal and fine, and nobody talked about, I mean, the head of the church died and several other leaders, and no one's talking about it. And everyone's just having a happy-go-lucky time at this wedding. And yeah, everyone acted happy. And then we do go back to the plane crash, because Natasha, if you remember, the mom of a child whose dad was Joe Lara, Gwen's second husband, there's a whole custody battle. Gwen and Joe go down in the plane crash. Natasha hears about it, briefly thinks her child was on the plane, because Joe did take their daughter on the plane, even though Natasha had a legal order saying he could not take his daughter on a plane. Natasha got that order specifically because she did not think Joe was a safe pilot, which she turned out to be right. Briefly, we think her daughter was on the plane. Oh my God, then we find out she wasn't. But we also find out the church people did not want to give Natasha her daughter when Gwen and Joe go down in the plane crash. So Natasha calls, I think, Joe's mom and says, like, I need to come get my daughter. I heard about the crash. You have her. And the grandmother won't tell her where the daughter is. So then Natasha calls Gwen and Joe's secretary, and she is a cold, angry, obstructionist bitch about it and won't tell her. And so then Natasha gets the cops and goes to the secretary's house, and her daughter's there. She has to get the police to force them to give her daughter back. Again, solely because this church wants to keep as many people as they can, just to keep their numbers up, to make it look like they're successful. So they won't even, this mother whose child's father has just died in a plane crash that morning, they want to deny her access to her daughter. And I mean, if you look at it from the point of view of either the mom or the daughter, like, the daughter's dad just died and you won't let her be with her mom. So they have to get the cops, and they're trying to be obstructionists with the cops, and the police are like, you bring that girl out here or you're under arrest. So they do. And the cops tell Natasha that it was really weird inside the house, that there were a bunch of kids of all ages, and the older kids were taking care of the younger kids. There were no adults babysitting, and that it was very strange. Okay, I already covered that guy. And they talk about grief stuff. Oh, we got her. Then we start hearing from Elizabeth Shamblin, Gwen's daughter's childhood friends, and they are saying that when she was in middle school or younger, she was like the sweetest kid and a great friend, and they all would go hang out at Gwen and David's house because Gwen's still married to her first husband, David. And that it was always fun, that Gwen was really loving and had a very open home to all of her kids' friends. And then that something changed. And then when Gwen started doing the way down, she wanted her teenage daughter to get her friends to do it. The ones who didn't want to, her daughter just cut off. And then when they start the Remnant Fellowship Church, any friends who don't join that church are cut off and cut out of her life, and that she changed. And they say that Gwen, they believe, Gwen picked Elizabeth's husband for her. Wait, how did I get back there? God damn it. Sorry. Oh. So this episode, we're almost done. Just letting Jason know, and you, the viewer, listener. This episode ends with footage of former members saying they are ready to tell their stories. And then we go to episode 5, which I didn't take that many notes on, and I'm glad because I have had it with this documentary. The bombshell of episode 5 is we find out before this documentary came out, the producers found out that Gwen had a reality show. At one time, she filmed a reality show. She was going to try to be like, I'm sure, like the John and Kate +8, or those house makeover people. I forget what they're called. They live in Waco, Texas. I don't know that they are Joanne and whatever his name is. I don't know that they are abusive the way that Kate Goslin and Gwen Shamblin are, but I haven't seen or heard anything about them being terrible people. But they are like a reality show family with a bunch of kids, and they're Christian. And I just give a disclaimer. I have known many Christian people who are not abusive, are not unkind. I have family friends who are really religious and against abortion, who voted for Hillary Clinton because against their pro-life values, because they believe Trump would be so harmful to this country and was so racist they couldn't support him. Like, please don't, as much as I believe extremist Christian churches and cults are abusive, I do not at all say all Christians are bad people. I don't believe that. And I've known many in my own life who are very loving. Give that disclaimer after I shit all over every reality show Christian who's ever lived. They show some footage from the reality show. Gwen's eye makeup is as baffling as her hair. Like, there's footage of her with Joe, her husband, and the reality show was something like Life with, I don't remember, but it was like she's trying to do a Smoky Eye, but instead her black eyeliner just comes way down under her lash line, so it looks like she's been crying. And she has giant hair, and my whole thing is, if I was rich, I would dedicate however much money it took to paying people to make me look as good as I can possibly look. I would not cut corners on hair and makeup. And that's not to say that everyone who does hair and makeup makes me look a way that I feel good about. They're great at their jobs. Every acting job I've had, the hair and makeup people have been great at their work. But sometimes the show or movie wants me to look like shit. And the way that I had Fidel Castro eyebrows for my role on Fallout, I said to several people, including Walton Goggins, between scenes when I saw them with my character's eyebrows, I said, I just want you to know these are not my real eyebrows. That's how self-conscious I was. But if I was wealthy and just hiring people to make me look good for a reality show or just going about town the way the Kardashians do, I wouldn't skimp. Like, keep me from looking like a dipshit, would you please? However much money that takes. If I'm rich, I'm spending it. Then there's footage of Elizabeth in the reality show talking. She looks like a ghoul, and she says she does everything she can to imitate her mom, to pass down what her mom teaches to future generations, because she thinks if everyone lived the way her mom lives, that it would change America. And I cannot agree more. If everyone lived the way Gwen Shamblin lived and told people to do the things that Gwen told people to do, it would horribly change America in a very profound way. By the way, we've already changed a lot in a profoundly bad way. There's another clip of Gwen talking about, my notes say, ew, period. Another clip from the reality show pilot, and Gwen is talking about how she tells women that it's fun to let men be men and be submissive. I mean, sure, let men be men, whatever that means. It's the be submissive part and selling that as fun. There's another clip of couples talking about how much the church has helped them. This is from the pilot. And then Gwen says, when you're in the church, you're constantly inventorying what's inside you, meaning like your intentions, your sinful thoughts, your desires, all that shit. The Patreon episode for last week, I go into how similar that is to stuff in AA. Then there's a former member saying that, she's saying she doesn't know why Gwen did this reality show because in the pilot and in the church, I guess, she doesn't really do anything. Like, she doesn't work. And that's how you know it's a fake church, because Gwen really doesn't do anything. And I really like the lady who says that. Then there's a response video from the Remnant Church about the HBO documentary, and it's a bunch of current members disputing claims made in the documentary. And one of the former members, and there's members making claims. Sorry, my notes are bad. They're defending the church, and then one of the former members says, if you were really trying to do something good in your church and you heard all these former members saying they have been traumatized by the church, you would try to fix things and make them better, not call those people liars. And I think that's a fair point. And then there's a part in the response video from the church where they have a doctor saying no one has ever been kicked out of this church for not losing weight. And then they cut from that to a woman who's a former member. Oh, yeah, they cut from him to a woman who's a former member saying that doctor saying that his own wife was kicked out of the church for not losing weight. So it's just blatant lies. And then here's the thing, and luckily we're at we're okay, we are at an hour here about of this episode length. And so here's the good news and bad news. I didn't finish episode 5. I couldn't get through it. I know there's more people, former members, talking about what happened to them in the church. I simply fell asleep, and I have not been able to bring myself to watch the rest of it. I also have not been able to bring myself to read the book of Gwen's that I bought, The Way Down Diet, her book. Maybe I'll be able to read it at some point. And maybe I won't. I hate it. I don't want to engage anymore with this horrible vibe of a nightmare cult. I will say the documentary, The Way Down, God, Greed, and the Cult of Gwen Shamblin, it is really well made. It is really juicy. It is very upsetting, and I will never watch anything like it again. I want to end on a fun note somehow. Well, nothing's coming to me, but this week's Patreon, I'm going to talk about I might be moving out of LA. I might go back to school, or I might just move out of LA as a fond farewell to show business. Couldn't have asked for more. 10 years I haven't had to have a day job. Extremely fortunate, and have had nothing but great experiences with getting to work with really lovely people who, any of whom, if they ever asked me to work with them again, I would in a minute. But I don't want to pay LA rent anymore when I'm not working. I haven't worked in 9 months. And Coyote versus Acme is coming out on August 28th. So it'll be, this will come out 2 days before the premiere. And you can go see it in theaters. I hope you do. It's got great ratings, great reviews. I just got an email from my manager and agent today that said it has been certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. I don't even know exactly what that means, but I know it's positive. I've seen it and I loved it. I hope everybody loves it. But I don't think that means I'm going to have more work soon. The industry right now is in a rough spot, and I just think that I would be happier if I'm not going to be making a living in show business. I think I would be happier paying a lot less rent somewhere greener and prettier. At the same time, the largest number of people I love are in LA, and the people that I love the most and am the closest to are in LA. So I don't want to leave because of that, but I might. And to end on a fun note, what I'm going to be talking about in the Patreon is some of my great show business experiences, especially stuff from baskets. One thing I will talk about is a little bit about Ray Liotta, who I got to meet because of Marriage Story. We didn't shoot together, but I met him at the premiere. And listen to the Patreon if you want to hear the details, but one of the most lovely fucking men I've ever met in my life. Was so sad to hear that he passed. I just loved him. And there are podcasts and interviews that he's done that you can find online where you'll hear why I love him. But you can also listen to the Patreon and hear about my experience with him. But just a genuinely we're all in it together, sweet guy. Couldn't have had a better time meeting him. So also Alan Alda, the same way. I just really had a great time. So I guess that's kind of a fun note to end on, and it could also be called the who gives a shit note. Why should we care what kind of fun you had, Martha? You can ask that listening to the free episode. If you're going to hate listen, I highly recommend doing it with the free episode. Don't spend your money if you're hate listening. And yes, in my not too recent past, I used to hate listen to some podcasts. And then at some point, I said to myself, ma'am, you have one foot in the grave. You're speeding towards old age and death. You can't afford to spend time hate listening. You've got to do something more with your life. But if you're young, you've got time to burn. You should hate listen to whatever you want for free. That's my recommendation. And if you're young, smoke cigarettes and then quit while you're still young. It's fun to smoke. Cigarettes are really bad for you, so only do it when you're young. Teenager to mid-20s that's the only window if you want to enjoy cigarettes. That's the only time you should do it. I quit when I was 35, but anyway, as far as I know, I don't have emphysema or cancer, but I'll find out sooner or later. And with that, thank you so much for listening, and Godspeed. Easy.